Okay. All right. Well, we'll start to let people in.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for attending our fiscal year 25-26 winter notice of funding availability technical assistance session today, hosted by uh, City of Redwood City, City of San Mateo, City of South San Francisco, and the County of San Mateo. We're just letting a couple folks trickle in here. We do ask if you can mute yourself. If any questions do arise, we ask that you add them into the chat box. And to track our attendance today and help see who attended today, we do ask that each participant in the chat add their name, first and last, and their agency affiliation as well. And we'll give it a couple more seconds before we officially kick things off. Thank you once again. All right, everyone. So it is 12:01. Thank you for once again attending the fiscal year 25-26 Notice of Funding Availability Technical Assistance Session, again hosted by City of Redwood City, City of San Mateo, the County of San Mateo, and City of South San Francisco. We also do have City of Daly City with us here as well, and they will actually be one of our special guests for our definition portion. Okay. So, again, we just wanted to give everyone a warm welcome. Today we'll be going over, starting with a couple of key definitions for some of the prospective applicants. We'll also, each jurisdiction will be going over their NOFA information and going over some additional details for their jurisdiction. After those specific sections, then we'll go over some federal funding requirements. And after that, we have our City Data Services team, which is our systems management utilization tool that we use for our applications. They'll be going over a quick demo. And at the end, we will be going over any questions that arise from the session. Just as a reminder, if any questions do come up as we go through any of the sections, we ask that you please add the questions within the chat box. Within that chat box, we are also asking for folks who are attending to drop their name, first and last, and also agency name. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start things off again with our definition section. The first definition we have is for public facilities. This definition is extracted from our HUD, basically CDBG resource page, and where it then identifies public facilities in general are public facilities and public improvements are interpreted to include all facilities and improvements that are publicly owned or that are owned by a nonprofit and open to the general public. Within this table, we have a very brief couple points of eligible activities under public facilities. In the next definition, we'll go ahead and pass it over to the City of Daly City.
Hi. So a community housing, okay, let me start by saying at least 15% of the home funding must be set aside for a community housing development organization. So what is a CHODO? So essentially a CHODO is a private nonprofit. It's a community-based organization that has staff with the capacity to develop affordable housing for the community it serves. In order to get the CHODO set-aside funding, you must be certified by the county as a CHODO. And a CHOTO application is included in the NOFA guidelines. I believe it's Exhibit 2, Attachment 15 of the NOFA. And so a CHOTO may use the home funds to develop affordable housing, either rental or ownership, and it must act as either the owner, developer, or sponsor of the activity. That's all I have. Next.
Thank you, Nilo. And now the city of Redwood City will be going over a couple of budget and indirect cost items.
Good afternoon. My name is Madiha Huck. I'm the housing specialist with the city of Redwood City. We wanted to provide a very brief overview of indirect and direct costs and some key points to consider when you're developing a budget for your application. So all costs can be classified as either direct or indirect. When considering whether a cost is indirect or direct, ask whether the cost can be traced. If the cost can be identified with a specific cost objective, such as a grant, contract, project, function, or activity, then it is a direct cost. Indirect costs, on the other hand, are those that have been incurred for shared or joint objectives and cannot be readily identified with any particular activity. So in this slide, we have some common examples of indirect and direct costs. This is not a complete list. There are a range of costs that could be categorized as direct and indirect. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to the jurisdiction that you're applying to funds for. Next slide. So your agency has the option to use the direct allocation method, and that's where you directly charge admin and clerical costs, including salaries, if the cost can be identified with a specific project activity. They are included in your approved budget, and the costs are prorated using a base that measures the benefit it provides to a program. However, many agencies opt to use an indirect cost rate, which is a percentage of an organization's indirect costs to its direct costs. It's a standardized method of charging individual programs for their share of costs, and it must be consistently used across all federal awards. So listed in this slide are the most common ways your agency can determine what your indirect cost rate is. Your agency can negotiate a rate with your federal cognizant agency, in which case this approved rate is the maximum rate you can request reimbursement for. Or your agency can elect the 15% de minimis rate, which is a percentage of modified total direct costs. In this method, the federal regs state that the subrecipient, which is the agency applying for funding, is authorized to determine the appropriate rate up to this limit. The federal regulations specify what is included in the modified total direct cost base. And so we have in this slide a list of things that are included in the rate base and things that are excluded, but this list is not comprehensive. So please refer to the regs or reach out to us if you have specific questions. And then the de minimis does not require any documentation to justify its use, and it can be used indefinitely. Once elected, the agency must use the de minimis rate for all federal awards until the agency decides to negotiate a rate. Next slide. So some key considerations when you're developing your budget: there is no universal rule for classifying certain costs as either direct or indirect. The federal government recognized that it's not possible to specify the types of costs that may be classified as indirect or direct in all situations. Additionally, if your agency opts to use the 15% de minimis rate, make sure your agency is calculating it correctly. A common misconception is that the de minimis indirect cost rate is expressed as a percentage of the total grant, but it's really important to remember that to determine your base, you may need to exclude certain categories. Another key consideration is that one of the purposes of using an indirect cost rate is that it needs to be consistently used so that you're not double charging federal awards or double dipping. Next slide. So in this slide, we have a example budget table, and this does not match city data services. It's just a condensed table. And so one thing to consider is that your proposed budget line items need to be specific. For example, labor line items should specify position titles, amounts being allocated towards each position. For indirect cost rates, if you have a negotiated rate and are including items that could be considered indirect costs, be prepared to provide like an explanation that you're not double dipping. So a common example of what we see is that agencies using indirect cost rate will also include a line item for something like occupancy. And so when we ask for clarification, it turns out that that isn't occupancy for an admin site, it's for a separate site that only conducts programmatic activities. So in that case, the occupancy site would be a direct cost. So you have to make that clear in your budget. And then again, if you're using the 15% de minimis, make sure you're calculating the base correctly. So in this example, they were approved for a total of 100,000 CDBG funds. They don't have a negotiated rate and they'd like to use the 15% rate. And so they're requesting 85,000 for direct program costs and 2,250 for rent utilities. So when they're calculating their base, they need to exclude that 2,250, and that leaves the base as 85,000. And so 15% of that will be 12,750. So that's the total that can be requested for indirect costs. And then all of that combined equals out the 100,000 that they were approved for. Next. So for fiscal year 2025-2026, we have a couple of different grant funding available from Redwood City. Next slide. So for our HUD grants, these amounts are estimates and they may change based on our final allocation from HUD. For fiscal year 25-26, we're estimating that we will have $434,581 for public facilities and our housing capital projects. For home, we estimate that we'll have $36,552 for Chodo and $678,377 for a housing project. As a part of this NOFA, we will also have $100,000 in Human Services Financial Assistance Funds. This is a Redwood City-specific grant used to support basic human needs services for persons or households in Redwood City. Next. So CDBG, home, and HSFA funds all have different eligibility criteria. Please see the NOFA for the eligibility descriptions for each funding source. Also, please note that the CDB portion of this NOFA is only for public facilities and capital housing projects. Public services for housing, economic development, and minor home repair are funded for a 2-year cycle. So fiscal year 25 will be the second year of this cycle, and these programs are not included in this NOFA. Applications for multiple funding source for the same activity will not be accepted unless it's for a housing project that qualifies for both CDBG and home. Next slide. So here are some key dates for Redwood City's NOFA schedule. Please note that program applicants are required to present at the February 25th Housing and Human Concerns Committee meeting. On March 25th, the HHCC will be making funding recommendations for CDBG, home, and HSFA, and then City Council will approve these recommendations in April for CDBG and home and May for HSFA. Next slide. So we wanted to provide a little bit more information about the mandatory presentations that will be taking place on February 25th. Agency representatives will have 3 minutes to provide highlights for the program and project that are not captured in the application. Committee members will then have 2 minutes to ask clarifying questions to the presenters after their presentation. Committee members may adjust an application score based on information provided in the presentation. Committee members may also adjust if the applicant does not participate in the presentation component of the application. Next slide. So to apply for Redwood City CDBG and home funds, applications can be accessed at City Data Services. If you are interested in applying for HSFA funds, please contact Mary Martinez. And her information is also listed in our NOFA. Next slide. Oh, and it's also listed here. So if you have any questions about CDBG Home, you can reach out to me.
Want me to send these over to Robert or?
Oh, and then for questions about HSFA, please reach out to Mary Martinez, who's the Human Services Coordinator, or Cherry Chin, who's the Human Services Manager. And that concludes Redwood City's portion.
Thank you, Dia. And now we will have City of San Mateo.
Ms. Jennifer Mora. I am a housing specialist for the City of San Mateo, and we'll be going over our NOFAs for CDBG and PLHA for the year of 2025-26. So the City of San Mateo has a community funding program, which is funded through CDBG entitlements. And this upcoming year, we're funding 5 major categories, which is public services, minor home repair, economic development, fair housing, and public facilities. The amounts that are beside each category are just an estimate, which will then be confirmed once we received our final HUD allocations or entitlement, sorry. We're only accepting returning applications for public services, minor home repair, economic development, and fair housing applications. We are also accepting new applicants for public facilities. Next slide. Moving on to our state grants, which is the permanent local housing allocation. We are also only accepting returning applicants for this NOFA, and we are looking to provide services assisting persons who are experiencing or are at risk of homelessness. Certain projects or programs that we fund are such as rapid rehousing, rental assistance, supportive case management services, or any operating or capital costs. Our estimated amount for our PLHA funds for the next fiscal year is $213,420. Next slide, please. So our timeline for our NOFA, we are finally live for our NOFAs for public services, public facilities, and our PLHA. We are accepting applications up until January 21st. And on February 19th, we are presenting these applications to our Community Relations Commission, who will then make funding recommendations. We do encourage our applicants to attend this meeting, which will be held at 7 p.m. at San Mateo City Hall. And we are going to be working to present these applications or funding recommendations for a public hearing with City Council on May 5th. And this is all an effort to ensure that our grant agreements have a start date of July 1st. Next slide, please. For any questions, you may reach out to Rachel Horst, who is the Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager, or myself. Our contact information is here, but then again, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out. If there's any issues with the application itself, you can also reach out to support@citydataservices.org. And thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now I'll be presenting. My name is Alejandro Segura with the County of San Mateo Department of Housing. I'm the community or housing and community development specialist here with the department, and I'll be going over a few key items for the San Mateo County specific NOFA and its applications. So for this year, it is a little unique. The county is going into the second year for our public services application. So these are essentially renewals, and the renewal applications are, again, for our public services, also related to our economic development, and our federal, state ESG, and PLHA are also renewals for this year. In addition, we are also receiving receiving new applications specifically for capital and public facility projects, minor home repair, and state ESG specific projects as well. Now, with the uniqueness of the year cycle, we do have 4 applications, and we wanted to briefly highlight an overview of the applications available to help applicants kind of track where to apply. And so the top three boxes would be for those with new applications, depending on your project type. For our renewal applications within your CDS account, you will be able to access your renewal application within that system or within that interface as well. As a brief example for, let's say, a nonprofit that is applying for the first time for a public facilities improvements, they would use the public facilities application and not the minor home repair state ESG application. Additionally, an important note that I want to highlight for all applications for the County of San Mateo, they are due on Tuesday, the 21st at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, they are due at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the 21st. If there is any questions into what application to use for the county, definitely reach out to us and we can provide that information for you all. For the county's estimates, we do have them laid out per the program area along with the specific grant sources available for this fiscal year 25-26. Again, these are estimated amounts from our previous year, and we won't know the true exact numbers until our HUD allocation. And now I'll pass it over to Karen Kopic to go over some additional eligible activity criteria.
Thank you. I'm Karen Kopic with the County of San Mateo. So for eligible activities, there are what HUD, the federal government, allows, and then the county has made a few policy choices in terms of what are eligible activities or not in this NOFA that we want to clarify. Some of these were the same as last year, but maybe not as clear. So we just wanted to clarify and also talk about some changes. So soft costs and pre-development costs are not eligible uses of either county or CDBG funding. That was the same as last year, but mistakenly they were included in the NOFA, so we just wanted to make that clear. They are not here now. CDBG for new housing is limited to conversion of non-residential buildings to housing. Home is limited to new construction projects that are 1 year. The construction will start 1 year from the funding award. The funding award would be around May or June of 2025. And neither home or CDBG can be used for acquisition as an eligible activity. And some of the drivers for these changes were the fact that the county is experiencing timeliness issues in terms of the money being spent in the time frame that's required by HUD, which is causing us to make some of these policy decisions. Thank you. Next slide. If it's a new project means you haven't submitted an application before to the county, and it's in a city, not if it's in the county. If it's in the county, we know about it, but if it's in a city, say you're going to do a project in Burlingame, this is for new housing projects primarily. So if you're doing a capital project and it's going to be, say, in Burlingame or Half Moon Bay, then please make sure you reach out to the city manager from that city and notify them, and then include that in your application. And basically what we want to make sure is that cities that are part of our consortium are aware that they're applying for our funding so that everybody's kind of on the same page. So that's something that was in the NOFA before, but we just want to make sure that was clear. And then here are our contacts. So please, we are, just I think as many of the jurisdictions, questions that we receive, we will document, we'll put them on our website, or you can reach out to us if you have further questions, need for clarifications, etc. So here's the NOFA is there, where you submit the applications. Again, ours are due at 4 p.m. on the 21st. We'll send you a reminder a few days before. And here are 3 contacts that you've heard from: myself, Alejandro, who's moderating, and Elzar Malaban is also one of our other specialists on the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Now we'll pass it over to the city of South San Francisco.
Hi, my name is Alvina Condon. I'm a housing management analyst with City of South San Francisco. And I will talk about South City's NOFA. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these are also estimated funding that we may have for next year. They're based on this year's funding. We are also in year 2 of our a 2-year grant cycle. So it should be mostly renewal applications for public services and for minor home repairs for under CDBG. And then we also have some fair housing service grant under home administrative funds. And then we also have non-CDBG funding that we call housing trust funds, but all of these are under the same renewal application on city data services. So next slide, please. So this is sort of a estimated timeline we'll have. I forgot to put the deadline of the application, but it is due at the same time as everyone else's application, which is January 21st at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And then South San Francisco staff will probably spend January and February reviewing the applications, and then we will take it to our CDBG subcommittee. And the rest of the timeline kind of goes through having a public hearing and then also presenting to our council. That takes us through March and April, but hopefully you'll be able to find out sooner than that if you receive a grant from us. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information. I oversee the CDBG and the housing grants. So if you have any questions for South San Francisco's NOFA, please contact me. Our NOFA is on our website. I put in a shortened link here, but you can also navigate to it on South San Francisco website through, if you just search for CDBG, you should be able to find the NOFA through that. So that's it for South City. Thank you.
Great. So we
Thank
thought we'd spend a few minutes talking about federal funding requirements. It's always an exciting topic, but we think it would be good to clarify just a few new things and just a few of the requirements. So this table, it's super busy. We will post the slides. We'll actually post this, we're recording this, but we'll post this recording. So this is really just in reference, and all of this is in the county NOFA, just in case you want to take a peek. But Davis-Bacon is the about fair wages, prevailing wage. And so for CDBG and home, if it's a new housing construction or new housing project or rehab, and there's more than 8 units for CDBG or 12 for home, that means that this requirement needs to be adhered to. Or if it's anything else, so a public facility project, you're doing a childcare build out, a homeless shelter, rehab, anything of that nature, then anything over $2,000, which is pretty much everything you do, would have to adhere to Davis-Bacon. So we just wanted to provide context of that. There's a link there to a little bit more information on how that those requirements work. For Section 3 is about attempting to use local talent for the projects that are being developed, particularly for construction-oriented projects. So if a project is receiving federal funding greater to $200,000 for the construction costs, then the Section 3 would be, you need to adhere to Section 3. There's pretty high targets, and the idea is you need to make best efforts in order to move toward achieving those targets, and you need to document the efforts that you make in that direction. Again, there's a link to that. And then minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses. So maybe Weeby VB. The VB one is a new one for me. This is any dollar amount in any type of project. If you have a contract over $10,000, again, use your best efforts to connect with qualified minority-owned, women-owned, or veteran-owned businesses. So these are 3 of kind of the federal funds labor and procurement requirements. They've been around quite a while, so if you're familiar with federal programs, they should be pretty straightforward. If you're newer, we just wanted to flag and let you know that they're here. But Alejandro was just previewing something a little newer for HUD, which is the Build America Buy America Act. So with the Infrastructure Act of 2021, one of the goals was to boost our industrial base and also support higher paying jobs. So to that end, the government instituted this Buy American preference. So for all infrastructure projects, so everybody on this call, what you're applying for, most of the housing construction and rehab, community facilities, public facilities rehab, those projects would have to adhere to the Buy American preference. That if they have federal funding in this next cycle, so for both CDBG and for home, it's now been triggered. The covered materials are metals other than iron and steel, plastic such as PVC pipe, glass, lumber, drywall, also iron and steels, and materials that are primarily composed of iron or steel. Doesn't include cement or other aggregates like stone, sand, and gravel. Implementation is actually a little bit similar to how Davis-Bacon is, that the requirement needs to be added into your bidding documents, contracts, and then there's a self-certification of compliance form that HUD has provided that the county at a minimum will be requiring people to self-certify that they have used local inputs. So this is new. We are the county, and we invite all to attend. We'll likely be putting on a working session on this the requirement, because I think HUD's rolling this out and we're all learning together in terms of how best to implement this and what the requirements are. Next slide, please. There are some waivers. The general waivers apply to everybody, and as long as you meet the criteria, we'd have there'd be a form to fill out certifying that, and then it would be waived. The specific waivers are different. So for the general waivers, there's 3. If it's under 200, if the project receives less than $250,000 in all federal funding, so if you receive 200 from the county and 100 from Redwood City, that's 300,000. So you've met the threshold. So it's not just per grant or per loan or grant, it's per project. If it's under 250,000 federal funding in the project, then there's a waiver for the Buy America, Build America preference. And again, these are infrastructure projects, not our public service projects or operations projects, but really the construction and rehab. There's a de minimis. So if the loan or the funds that you're provided equal no more than 5% of the total cost of the covered materials, the iron, steel, manufactured products, et cetera, then, and that's less than $1 million, then again, that would be waived. And then thirdly is if there is a exigent circumstance, that word's always tricky. So an urgent need, and this would be something I think would really be a case-by-case basis and a discussion on, a building falls or a bridge falls or something happens and there's a life or safety issue that needs to be done immediately, and sourcing requirements have to be, readjusted. So these 3, as long as your project meets one of them, those are straightforward. Then there's specific waivers. There are 3 different: public interest, if it's not in the public interest to use American based input or US; non-availability, it's simply can't, this is just not enough supply out there to meet your need; or unreasonable cost, if it would increase the cost, I think it's more than 50% of the project. In those cases, you can petition, and you'd petition through your jurisdiction partner, so be it the county or one of the cities. It's a lengthy review process, and apparently it's still being created. So somebody would bring the request forward, HUD would review, it's posted in the Federal Register for public comment, goes to the Made in America office, and then there's a final approval. So right now, and apparently it's still kind of being figured out, estimates are that could be a 9-12 month process. So that could be a little tricky, but these are still, like I say, being rolled out. So I think over time some of these other waivers may become a little more structured, but they are a heavier lift for those. Our city data services partners, we'd love to invite you to do a demo.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Deb from City Data Services, and I'll be doing a demo today for the Renewal app. So everyone should be able to see that. Can I share my screen, please? you.
You should be able to share, Deb, your co-host. Okay, great.
There you go. Thanks so much. Okay, so for new applicants, well, for renewal, there is no new applicants, but if you are going to apply for other applications within San Mateo County, Redwood City, City of South San Francisco, this is the initial website that you will need to go to. And if you would need to create an account, you would need to enter the login SMC 2025, that's in all caps. That's the username and the password. And it should take you to a form to fill in so you can create an account with CDS. And you would just need to choose the type of application that you will be applying for. And make sure that you fill all of these in, especially the email address, because that is where we're going to send your login credentials. And also, once you click on the request an account button right here at the bottom, it would show you your credentials on screen. Now, I'll be leaving the credentials in chat as well for everyone, along with our support email before we go to the renewal applications. So I'll just be using a test application for today. For existing programs that are already in CDS, you should be able to see start a renewal app link once you log in. Right, so it's pretty busy on the screen because we have a lot of apps that we're testing. So my apologies for that. But if you all are having, or if you already have a login, you should be able to see here on this column, the application column, start a renewal app. So right now it's showing draft renewal app for me because I have already started one. So let me just take you there. For the other applications, you should be able to see there are green buttons right there at the top. That's the same for all the jurisdictions. So you should see there the green buttons for the applications that are available. Now for the renewal app, let's go. So if you click on this link, it should show you this application. Now you have here the due date right at the top. You have your NOFA and the instructions, and of course, a data entry on which you would need to fill in these with as much information as you can. So the application will get approved. And also you would need to indicate here which city, which county are you going to be applying for. So you have here Redwood, City of San Mateo County, and South San Francisco. Then if you scroll right here at the bottom, you have some data entry. You have your tables right here. And of course, your budget table. So these sections will still automatically calculate depending on the amounts that you put in the table. You have data entry and of course, your attachments right here at the very bottom. Now to go to these attachments, there is a click here to go to the upload documents page. If you go on this link, it should take you to an upload documents page. And attaching a file for these fields is like attaching file to an email. Just simply click on choose file, pop-up window comes up, and then select your file and then click on upload document, and it would show up here. If you ever upload a document by mistake, you can take it off easily by clicking on the red X, and it should disappear. If you feel that you've uploaded a document already that belongs here, or it should be attached to the application, you can just select the existing document right here in the drop-down. Click on that, then attach, and it would pop up back again. You would need to go back to the application. You're done uploading your documents. Just click on the return to application link at the very bottom. So it's pretty straightforward, data entry, tables and such. If you do need help with this page, there's a green help with this page button at the top, or you can also email us at the support email that I've dropped in the chat. So that's the renewal application for you. Do we have any questions so far?
don't see any questions.
All right. Well, if someone has any questions after this, or if you have any questions during the call, feel free to send us an email or drop a chat. We live in the inbox, so we should be able to address your concerns straight away. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Deb. Now that our demo is over and our jurisdictions each went over their specific NOFAs and provided some information, we did want to open up some space to address any questions that came in through the chat, or if anyone has any questions right now, we do ask, if possible, to raise your hand before or drop your question in the chat, and we can begin to answer any questions that have arose. Any questions?
Hi, thank you all. I have two questions pertaining to home repair projects. I understand that answers may vary depending on jurisdiction, but the first question is just if there's any cap per home for the repair projects. And then the second question is for the administrative fees, if there's a preference for a flat fee or actual cost. Thank you.
I could take a stab, and then I maybe the different. Well, I guess the question, Caitlin, are you applying for a specific jurisdiction? Because there are some slight differences, so that might be helpful. Or maybe you can list which, if there's multiple, which ones, just so we can address your question more specifically.
Absolutely. Thanks, Karen. We're applying to Redwood City, Daly City, and San Mateo County.
Okay, so since I was talking, I will chime in. Generally, for San Mateo County, we generally have a 5,000 maximum on minor home repair. There's a few cases we've gone higher, and that would be a conversation that we'd need to have. The administrative fees, generally there's a 15%, a maximum of 15% of the, as Redwood City at Media had gone over the indirect rate. So the maximum is 15% for CDBG grants. And so that's what, so there'd be that flat fee versus the actual, that you don't need to show all the documentation in the backup. It would be 50% of the total modified direct costs. Does that, for the county's perspective, does that answer your two questions, Caitlin? And we can loop back directly if you want to talk about the first one more.
No, I think that is great. Thank you.
Caitlin, I can chime in for Redwood City. For minor home repairs, we don't have a cap per project, but the federal regulations do have additional lead paint requirements if the project is above a certain threshold. The agency is responsible for meeting the proposed scope goals, so we recommend keeping that in mind. So if like a particular project is more, that might mean the overall agreement goals won't be met. And then for administrative, it depends on whether your agency is opting to use a 15% de minimis rate or if there's already a negotiated rate. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks, Nadia. I think it does. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? I see one came into the chat. For the county NOFA, do amount set aside for different categories act as a cap, i.e. if no PSH project apply, would additional funds be available to a non-PSH housing project based on the 15% for CHODOs and 50% for PSH? You're on mute, Karen. If you
Great, I'm giving an eloquent answer, but so the categories are, there is 15% of our CDBG funding we do apply for our public service grants. Those are most renewals, and that we do like to respect that cap and maximize that funding. The rest of the funding is somewhat fungible between the different different types of eligible activities. So depending on how many and the nature of the different applications, we may go higher in one category, lower in another. Again, depending on the composition and the how many of the applications, directly speak to the priorities of the county as outlined in the NOFA versus others, there could be different allocations. So I guess the question is, there is flexibility and fungibility in the funds, as long as it's an eligible activity, and a lot is depending on the type and nature of the applications we receive. And please let me know if that didn't sufficiently answer your question.
Any other questions? I don't see a response in the chat yet. I think you're muted, Karen.
Oh, you may have questions directly to you that you're looking at.
I see.
There was a question about, sorry, just to follow up on that, was that for CDBG or home? That's an interesting question. So CDBG funding, we have the 15%. New construction is not eligible for CDBG funding in 2025-26. So that, as you mentioned, as the person mentioned in their question, so home would be the only funding available for new construction. Home is also an eligible use for some rehab projects. So that would be the bucket of opportunity, or bucket of projects that would be competing against each other or evaluate against each other.
Any other questions before we wrap things up? We do want to make sure if there's any questions, we want to make sure we provide you all the opportunity now. But if not, we all did share contact information related to the NOFA. So for each jurisdiction you're applying to, if there's any follow-up question, highly encourage you all to reach out.
And I think one final thing is the different city and the county may have different times when their applications are due. So please, please, please make sure you look at the specifics, because I believe some are at 4 p.m. and some are at 5 p.m. And so we just want to make sure that everybody sees that. There was a question, Alejandro, about showing the screen again for the funds available for the
Yeah, let me see if I can bring that up. Is my screen up right now?
Yes.
And the presentation's up?
Yes.
Okay. Should be right here. And again, these are estimates.
Yeah. So basically what we did is we, and we'll be posting these slides online, but we did an estimate of how how much funding we believe we'd have this cycle based on the amount available last year. So these numbers could change. They could change. Last year, home was 8-10% lower and CDBG a little higher. So they do fluctuate year to year. So the home projects for capital development could be rehab or new housing. It's about almost 1.5 million. Then for CDBG would be the housing preservation public facilities, the minor home repair. Those two are about, you can see about almost 2 million together. And so those we do anticipate that the minor home repair would likely stay in that around that range. So there's about 1.3, 1.4 million perhaps for housing preservation public facilities. Then the rest is PLHA, some ESG, state and federal ESG, which I think probably aren't the directly what's being questioned. So the first two categories there, depending on the applications, last year we granted one grant with a combination of home and a little bit of CDBG for one project, and then CDBG for a few other ones. So there's a little bit of flexibility in some of those. But again, a lot depends on which applications we receive and what the nature of them are. So home can't be used for some of the CDBG items. CDBG can't be used for home, but there is an overlap for some activities, rehab in particular.
Okay. If there, oh,
And I did make a comment about a $5,000 maximum. We have a minor home repair program. We don't have a major home repair program for the city or for the county. So for the county, it's a $5,000 maximum. And I think Madi had mentioned that that's also where there's different lead-based requirements that come into play. We don't do, I believe, Daly City and some other project or other areas have larger rehab or even maybe loan programs for significant rehab. The county hasn't supported those, haven't supported those. So it's really the minor home repair is the category, or a specific project where they need, say, a multifamily house or complex where there's a repair needed would be the two scenarios.
okay. If there is, I don't think there's any additional questions. Did want to thank you all for attending, and to the presenters on the cohort. Thank you again for your time today. If any questions arise, or if there's a question about which application to use, please reach out to the jurisdiction you're applying for, and we'll be happy to help you all. And again, we're about 2 weeks from January 21st, so highly encourage folks to go into their applications and take a look around and see if there's any questions that might come up. Other than that, I think we will end the session, stop our recording, and we thank you all again for your attendance. We have a last minute question that just came in.
What's the question?
You answered it, Karen.
Oh, then we're all good.
Okay. No,
All right.
CDBG cannot be used for new construction. That was one of the changes. The only one would be converting existing building into new housing, new affordable housing.
All right.